Hello. As you can tell by the title, this is most likely going to be my last AFK guide video, and I probably won't be putting out text guides much more either. This won't necessarily be a traditional guide video either. It's more so explaining why this is probably going to be my last engagement with AFK guides for a while, and some pointers at the end on how to actually come up with AFK methods yourself. Basically, my methodology that I take when I try to figure these things out. If you only care about that part where you're actually solving the guides, I'll provide timestamps in the description. That way you can skip to it, because the beginning of this video is going to be my explanations for it and probably a little bit of ranting. So I'm going to go a little unscripted for a bit, so I don't blame you if you want to skip it. Anyways, let's get into it. So first and foremost, why no more videos? Honestly, a lot of it just comes down to the difficulty of the format and maintaining guides this way. When it comes to text guides and, images or whatever, if you just make a guide in MS Paint, for example, those are really easy to keep up to date because not a lot of effort actually goes into updating them. With a text guide, if gear changes, you just change the gear loadout and you change either the reasoning or the weapon that's being used in the text. Super easy, super fast, very easy to update. And this is also why in PvMe, for example, we usually don't do video guides, because they're hard to keep up to date. And, not everyone has the time to be recording and, providing audio commentary, things like that. It's just a lot of effort compared to other forms of media that get the point across, especially for AFK, because realistically, you don't need a lot of info with these. All you need is your gear loadout, a revo bar, and where to stand. And, sometimes there's some intricacies, like, oh, you should put an old ACK coil here, you should put a cannon here, you should be praying this and this instead of what you normally would, or, things like that. It's stuff that a video isn't needed for, and for the effort that's required, it's just, I don't see much point in doing it anymore. At most, maybe just an example video. Those are fine because those are low effort. Like, yeah, you might need to put in, 20 to 60 minutes, depending on like how much of the point you want to get across for how AFK something is or how it works. But yeah, overall, just videos just aren't feasible to maintain. And I just don't want to be putting in that much time anymore when I can get the point across in like 10-15 minutes with other media. So as far as stepping away from AFK guides in general, this isn't like a binary set in stone thing. If I feel like making one, I probably will. It's just going to be, maybe not as high effort as I used to. Because honestly, AFK guides take a deceptively long amount of time in order to get the method working, in order to get something optimized, like make it to the point where it's actually like feasibly AFK, you survive, you're making money, this, that, and the other thing. Like Fenthraken, for example, took well over a week of like constant theory crafting, constant testing, just things like that, just to get it to, like where I wanted it to be. And then on top of that, I had to optimize it more. I had to figure out like, do I need a Necklace of Salamancy? Do I need a Hex Hunter bow? Do I need this, that, and the other thing? And it does add up. Like, I think total between me starting the AFK, then Thraken theory crafting, to actually finishing the guide and getting the second updated version out, I probably spent about 2 weeks total. And that's a lot of time, especially when it's just me staring at a screen for most of it, making sure that it's working, testing like, Blood Reaver, like scroll speeds, like what's going to work. So it's largely just because of the time that goes into it. And on top of that, I tend to get asked a lot of questions that, because it's related to my guide, I feel compelled to answer, just because it's like, it's my property. It feels like my responsibility sometimes. But a lot of questions can be answered by just reading what's in the guide. And it does get a little frustrating sometimes because, I'm spending more time outside of what has already gone into the guide into answering things that are already answered in the text, already answered in the image. Another thing is like, I have a disclaimer in the guides where, it's like I list the gear that's needed, I list the abilities that are needed, and when people ask, can I do this without it? Again, in the disclaimer, or at least mentioned somewhere in the guides, I say like, yeah, you can try downgrading it, but understand that you may not reach the same efficiency, it may not work. That's there to kind of get the point across that it might not work if you're going to downgrade. And it's okay if you want to try downgrading, because honestly, if you can get away with lesser, then you know what? That's great. You can make more money off of it. You can start earlier, what have you. But when it's a constant thing that it's like, can I do this without Cinderbanes? Can I do this without like one of the mandatory requirements? I don't want to have to keep answering when there's already an explanation in the guide. It's because realistically, I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't want to go in game and test your like niche gear scenarios because it's not worth my time. And if you want to try it, then go for it. If you want to experiment and see, can I do this following this guide with less gear, go for it. But that's on you. That's not my job to figure that out for you. I already provided the template of what needs to be done. So I don't want to be expected anymore to spend that time for people who aren't willing to put in the effort themselves. And leading off of that frustration point, it has been frustrating. Like even since writing the Greg guide for God knows how long ago, like 2, 3, 4 years, I don't know how long it's been. It gets frustrating dealing with some people because, the game changes. Like I want to update guides. I want to do this. I want to do that. Like already it gets tough dealing with it and hearing it when you make these guides to give people a way to turn their brain off and make money and engage with the game minimally. Because maybe they're working from home. Maybe they want to focus on some other things. Maybe they want to watch Netflix, YouTube, whatever. Like I make these so that they can engage less but still feel like they're being productive. And people will comment saying that it's inefficient, it's not good, why'd you make this guide, it's worse than other methods, when the entire point is that it's not supposed to be better than anything, it's just to be productive. So comments like that get annoying, or when I update an obsolete guide with a method that's more accessible, is cheaper, and by accessible, I mean even to Ironmen, like not even trying to be like, oh yeah, it costs less than this piece of gear or whatever. Like no, it's genuinely more accessible in all senses of the word for both mains and irons. When I remove an obsolete method, despite it being obsolete for a reason, despite it being more inefficient for a reason, there's always going to be someone who is like, why did you remove that guide? Put that guide back. I don't get why you're removing things. I don't get why you feel the need to get rid of something that worked perfectly well, when it's just, it feels like misinformation to me, leaving something like that up. Because why would I tell someone to do something worse when something better and more accessible exists? So getting comments like that just kind of pisses me off, and especially when it's just something that I'm trying to do to help the community at large. And on top of that, it's just frustrating dealing with like what feels like this constant expectation of me to make AFK guides for what anyone wants, to keep everything up to date, despite the fact that I honestly barely engage with RuneScape 3 anymore. And also just people getting mad at me when a guide doesn't work for them. And 99% of the time, the guide's not working because they are cutting corners. Because here's the fun thing about AFK guides. It removes any element of skill, which means that the only variable is your stats and your gear, and as well as your revo bar or whatever. I provide all those things. That puts you on a level playing field with everyone else. So if a guide isn't working for you, that means it is on you. You didn't follow something in the guide. Now, if you're going to get mad at me because it's not working and you're going to blame me, it gets really fucking old. It pisses me off because chances are all you did was not read the guide, or you tried to cut something out and expected it to work as advertised. And when it doesn't, you should be looking at yourself being like, okay, why isn't this working? But instead, I get a lot of this guide doesn't work. This guide is shit. This person is shit. And it just gets really irritating. Like it's most of the reason why I don't like making AFK guides anymore, because the second it doesn't work for someone or the second something's different, it just comes down on me, despite it not being my fault in any sense of the word. So I'm sorry for that being more ranty than the rest of it, but really that point pisses me off so much. And it's a lot of, it really is. It's like the biggest reason why I hate making AFK guides now, because it's just an expectation of me to be making them to whatever standard that they have. And when it doesn't work, if they need to change it for whatever reason, it doesn't work, they blame me. So I'm very much over that. And lastly, making AFK guides, sometimes it's fun. Fenthraken, even though it took a really long time, that was fun to figure out. Carapac normal mode stuff, that was fun to figure out. Greg, early in the day, even though it wasn't that complex, was fun to figure out. Discovering that Blood Reavers had their interaction with poison and being the person that was able to spread that throughout the game, that was amazing. Like, I loved being, on the forefront of some of these things and discovering new metas for AFK, or even, something like Solak, where it's feasible to bring a Blood Reaver now instead of using a Ripper Demon. It was really fun discovering these things, finding out these methods, Like, being the first person to properly AFK a Thenthraken for 5 minutes. Like, things like that are great. I loved that part of making AFK guides. What I didn't love was when it all got reduced to wearing magic tank gear and using Animate Dead. Because realistically, almost anything that you want to AFK that doesn't require movement in the game can be AFK'd with just that. Like, you can do it in Gano, you can use a fucking camel staff, you can use fucking Cyber Wand and Orb and stuff. It's not fun when the method boils down to a single spell in the game, reducing any, difficulty or nuance to solving a method. Because realistically, an AFK method is finding out how you can do something for an optimal amount of time without engaging with it. Slayer mobs, that's usually 2 or 3 minutes. Bosses, that can be 5. And it's fun when there's like a specific setup that you need to find. You're solving a puzzle basically. But when the puzzle is answered by Animate Dead almost every single time, it's just not like, I don't get anything out of making those guides anymore. Like, the most that I can get out of it is optimizing it, but similar to my point before, that sometimes takes a lot of time. And it's time that I'm spending being bored watching a screen, watching a game play itself. And the only thing I'm changing is maybe bringing a cannon or a coil, maybe using aggro potions. So the fun has been kind of taken out of AFK guides, which is why I don't like making them anymore, and why I'm kind of passing the torch to anyone who is willing to watch this video, regardless of whether or not you suffered through my, I think, 10 minutes of kind of ranting. So if you listened this far, thank you. I'm sorry you kind of had to deal with me being a little unhinged, unscripted. It's just kind of a lot that I want to get out there because I know people are still hoping for more AFK stuff. I know people get confused by the fact I uploaded 2 Final Fantasy videos instead of RuneScape. So there you go. I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time talking about this. I really appreciate it if you listened this far. But otherwise, let's get into the actual ideology of how to make your own AFK guide or come up with your own AFK method. Now, for my actual methodology of figuring out how to do an AFK method, or at least where to start, first things first, what do you want to AFK? If you can't think of anything off the bat, like you can't think of a good reason, well, find out that reason. Do you want to be making money? Do you want to be getting XP? Whatever it is, have that in mind and figure out what exactly you're killing. Whether it's a Slayer mob, whether it's a boss, as long as you know where to start, that's all you need as a jumping off point. Now, important step as well is check if a guide already exists. It doesn't have to be a text guide, doesn't have to be a video guide, whatever it is, just check if it exists, because even if your goal is to make a method as optimal as possible, you may as well start with as much information as you can. For example, when I started doing Ganodermic Beasts, I was referring to other guides, referring to previous knowledge, and, I started in my player-owned Slayer dungeon. I was getting about 700 kills per hour, and I'm like, you know what? This is great, but I want to put other things in my dungeon. Let me figure out if I can make the natural habitat work for me. And that was my motivation. It wasn't necessarily out of desire for money, it was just desire to make it work without committing Slayer dungeon space. And as it turned out, after some messing around, optimizing, I realized that my gear setup was overkill, and I could go in with literally lucky subjugation robes, Ganodermic boots and gloves, and, as I mentioned in my rant earlier, a fucking camel staff. The entire setup is under 50 mil. It costs less than 2 mil an hour to upkeep, even with using 2,000 cannonballs per hour. It's really cheap, it's really effective, and it's better than in the player-owned Slayer dungeon. And that's all you need for motivation, is just figure out you don't need a good reason, you just need a reason that's working for you, that's important to you. So that's where you need to start. And if a guide doesn't get you to that point, then you need to just put forth a little effort and start thinking critically. Now, ultimately, as I mentioned in my 10 minutes of being unscripted and unhinged, AFK methods basically boil down to being puzzles. Now, oftentimes, especially in the cases of Slayer mobs, where you're taking a lot of rapid low hits, Animate Dead and Tank Armor is almost always going to be enough to mitigate this and be the solution to what you're doing, at which point it's just going to be optimizing it, trying to go for higher kills per hour or lower input cost. Other times, though, it's going to take a little bit more thinking to figure out, what's going wrong. And at that point, you have to start identifying roadblocks in solving this puzzle. You have to look at the problem that's in front of you, figure out a way to solve that, and then move on to the next one and continue solving these steps as they come up, ultimately leading to you successfully AFKing and hopefully reaching the time frames that you don't have to engage with the game that you want, whether it's 2 or 5 minutes, whether, 3 minutes is enough for you, whether it's just killing the boss. Reaching those goals is the important part, but you have a few steps that will come before. Now, just an example of a series of these harder steps that you might need to tackle, we're going to look at Thenthraken AFK. Now, the 3 big things that I had to get past were the damage that Thenthraken dealt, dealing with overcharge, and killing the boss fast enough that a second overcharge didn't happen, because if it did, it would kill me no matter what I did. Now, mitigating enough damage, or at least dealing with the damage that's being taken, that mostly just boiled down to having a Blood Reaver familiar auto-casting its scrolls, as well as placing Debilitate at a good spot on my bar. Defensive perks on Sirenic did help, but it was far from necessary from my testing. Now, the second step was, of course, dealing with overcharge. The previous method that wasn't very AFK was to use escape after overcharge was placed on you and after it dropped. It would leave it where you started the kill, and you would finish the kill where escape placed you. Conversely to the method that I took, which actually allowed it to be fully AFK and allow different weapon choice aside from a Nox Longbow or a Siren Godbow, I had it so that escape would place you, and then overcharge would drop, and you would run back. And this provided it just to be a consistent kill where you didn't have to reset your position every single time. It allowed you to live, and it dealt with the biggest roadblock that many people thought would be impossible to deal with. And then finally, of course, is dealing enough damage to Thenthraken. That's not that hard of a step, but it basically just boiled down to realizing what was necessary to reach the damage thresholds that you would need to not see a second overcharge. Whether that was a Hex Hunter bow, being on task, or having a Necklace of Salamancy, any of those basically answered that question, that step, and it allowed for the AFK to be possible. Now, you're not going to see steps like that in every, case that you're trying, but expect that level of problem that you need to get around and think of the ways that need to be employed to solve them. So once you've solved all the hard steps and you're killing the boss, you're consistently at 5 minutes or 2 minutes, whatever time that you need, whatever mob you're killing. Once you have the survivability factor down, at that point you can start optimizing it if you feel it's important to. Again, this can be just getting more kills per hour, getting faster kills, higher survivability, cheaper input cost. Basically whatever goal you think that optimizing will bring you is something that you should strive for. Because that's, for most things nowadays, that's going to be where most of the fun part is. Because again, Animate Dead's going to answer a lot of the problems that come to actually making an AFK method possible. It's going to be optimizing it where you're going to have the most fun solving these puzzles. So that's really about it. I'm sorry that it wasn't a traditional guide. I know that this was basically just about 20 minutes of kind of ranting and kind of passing responsibility on to my viewers. I don't want it to be, a bad taste in anyone's mouth with me not wanting to make AFK guides anymore. A lot of this was just, I want to take a break from them, if not stop them entirely. And again, I went into it in the first 10 minutes of ranting why I don't want to do it anymore. And I don't want to be like, hey, it's your job to make AFK guides now. Obviously, don't feel compelled if you're not interested in it. Just follow guides that other people put out. It's just, I didn't want to, just disappear and leave you with nothing. I wanted to give you guys at least some kind of insight into how I tackle doing these AFK methods, how I try to have fun with them. So I really hope you're able to take something away from that. And again, I'm sorry this was such a long video and this basically just turned into a channel update of sorts. But yeah, thank you so much for sticking around. I'd say to hit the subscribe button if you want more AFK guides, but let's be real here, it's probably not going to happen. If any more do get posted, it will probably just be a for fun thing that I post in PVME. So pay attention in there if you want to look out for anything I post, because it is fun teasing people and letting them guess what a method is. But yeah, if anything, I'm probably going to focus on other games on my channel from now on. So don't feel compelled to stick around if you don't want to. I don't blame you. I know my channel was focused on one thing for a while, and that's why most of you are here. So yeah, aside from that, again, thank you so much for sticking around if you listen to this whole thing. I hope that you got something out of this. I'm sorry again that it was 20 minutes of ranting. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me explaining away my not making AFK guides anymore. And yeah, happy AFKing. Have a great time, guys. Thank you.